Pretend you're my daughter. Millionaire CEO told little girl in court, and saved her from orphanage. One morning, Alexander Grant sat at his dining table, staring at a file his assistant had sent him. The note on top read, "Court hearing for the orphanage case today. Possibility of shutdown." Alexander was a millionaire CEO, used to solving problems with money and strategy. But this case was different. If the orphanage closed, children with no families would be scattered into state homes. He told himself he was only curious, but deep down he felt pulled to be there. He put on his suit and left for court. He entered the courtroom quietly and took a seat near the back. The judge, lawyers, and social workers were already present. The atmosphere was serious. As the case began, Alexander noticed a little girl sitting alone on a bench. She was about 7 years old, holding a small teddy bear. Her clothes were simple, and her eyes looked lost. She was not speaking to anyone. The state attorney argued that the orphanage had poor funding and conditions. The plan was to move the children to different places. The judge listened carefully, but the direction was clear. The orphanage would be shut down. Alexander's lawyer leaned toward him and whispered, "That girl's name is Emma. Parents died in an accident. No relatives came forward. She has been here for 2 years." Alexander kept looking at her. Something about her expression reminded him of his own loneliness. She sat quietly, but her eyes carried fear of being abandoned again. The judge sighed. "It appears we have no choice. The children will be relocated." Emma hugged her teddy bear tightly. Her lips trembled, but she stayed silent. At that moment, Alexander stood up. The courtroom turned to him. His reputation as a powerful CEO made everyone curious. "Your Honor," Alexander said firmly, "I request to speak." The judge nodded. "Go ahead, Mr. Grant." Alexander walked forward, his eyes on Emma. He bent slightly so only she could hear, and said softly, "Pretend you're my daughter." Emma looked at him with wide eyes. She did not answer, but her small hands gripped the teddy bear tighter. Alexander turned to the judge. "This child should not be moved into the system. I am willing to take responsibility. If the court allows, I want temporary guardianship." The room filled with murmurs. The judge raised his hand for silence. "Mr. Grant, this is unusual. Procedures and background checks are required." "I understand," Alexander replied. "But please, let her not be sent away today. I will complete every requirement. For now, I am ready to provide her a home." The judge studied Alexander, then looked at Emma. Slowly, the girl lifted her hand and reached toward Alexander. That single gesture spoke louder than words. The judge finally said, "Temporary guardianship will be granted. The case will be reviewed again in 2 weeks." The gavel struck, and the decision was made. Emma would not be sent away. Alexander knelt beside her and took her hand. For the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. Emma looked at him and whispered, "Are you really my dad now?" Alexander's heart tightened. But he gave her a gentle smile. "For today, yes. And maybe for forever." They walked out of the courtroom together. A powerful man and a small child. 2 lives unexpectedly joined by a single choice. They stepped outside the courthouse, still holding hands. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, but Alexander ignored everything. Emma stayed close to him, her teddy pressed to her chest. For her, the world outside was loud and frightening, but she felt a strange safety by his side. The driver opened the car door. Alexander guided Emma inside gently. She sat quietly, looking out of the window, unsure of what was happening. For years, she had only known the walls of the orphanage. Now she was sitting in the car of a man she barely knew, but who had just promised to protect her. As the car moved, Alexander spoke softly. "Emma, we are going to my home. You don't need to worry. Everything will be okay." She looked at him for a moment, then whispered, "Is it far?" "Not very far," he replied with a small smile. The ride was silent after that. Alexander didn't want to overwhelm her with questions. He could sense her fear, and he respected her silence. When they arrived, the driver opened the door. Emma stepped out, holding tightly to her teddy. She looked at the large house in front of her. It was big, much bigger than anything she had seen before. To her, it did not look like a home. It looked like a place where she might get lost. Alexander noticed her hesitation. "Come," he said gently. "This is your home now." She followed him inside. The rooms were spacious, the ceilings high, but everything felt quiet. Emma stood in the hallway, unsure of where to go. Alexander bent down to her level. "Would you like to see your room?" She nodded slowly. He led her upstairs and opened the door to a simple, but warm room he had asked his staff to prepare. A soft bed, a small desk, and shelves for toys and books. Emma walked in carefully, her eyes scanning the space. She placed her teddy on the bed and touched the blanket. "Do you like it?" Alexander asked. Emma turned toward him and gave a small nod. "It's nice. I'm glad," he said, smiling. "This is yours. You can keep your things here. You don't have to share it with anyone unless you want to." For the first time, a faint light appeared in her eyes. She sat on the bed, hugging her knees, and whispered, "Thank you." Alexander felt something inside him soften. He had closed many deals in his life, but this quiet "thank you" felt more valuable than any contract. That evening, they ate dinner together. Alexander kept the food simple: soup, bread, fruit. Emma ate slowly, still careful, still unsure if she was truly allowed to relax. He noticed she glanced at him often, as if waiting for him to tell her what to do. "Emma," he said gently, "you don't have to ask me for permission to eat or to speak. This is your home too." She lowered her gaze and whispered, "At the orphanage we always had to wait." Alexander's heart tightened. "You don't have to wait here. You are free to be yourself." Later, he found her sitting near the window, holding her teddy and looking outside. He sat beside her. "Do you miss your parents?" he asked softly. She nodded without speaking. A tear rolled down her cheek. She quickly wiped it, but Alexander noticed. "I can never replace them," he said quietly. "But I can promise you one thing. You will never be alone again." She turned to him, her eyes uncertain. "Will you keep me forever?" His chest tightened. He looked at her seriously. "Yes, Emma. If you let me, I will keep you forever." She leaned slightly against his arm, a small but powerful gesture of trust. Alexander placed his hand gently on her shoulder. In that moment, he understood that his life had changed completely. When it was time for bed, he walked her to her room. She climbed into bed with her teddy. Alexander pulled the blanket over her. "Good night, Emma." She looked at him, her eyes half closed. "Good night, Dad." The word hit him like a wave. It was the first time she had said it. He stayed by the door for a moment, then whispered, "Good night, my daughter." As he walked to his own room, Alexander knew the journey had only begun. The court had given him 2 weeks. But he was already certain. He would do whatever it took to make Emma his daughter forever. 2. The next morning, Alexander woke up earlier than usual. He could not stop thinking about the single word Emma had spoken before falling asleep. "Dad." It was small, quiet. But it had shaken him more than any boardroom decision in his life. He realized it was not just a word. It was trust, fragile and precious, placed in his hands. He walked to her room and opened the door quietly. Emma was still asleep, her teddy pressed to her chest, her hair spread across the pillow. She looked peaceful. And for a moment Alexander simply stood there, wondering how such a small child could carry so much pain, and still have the courage to trust someone new. He went downstairs and called his lawyer. The man explained that the court would need proof of a stable environment. Inspections would be scheduled. And officials would want to see how Emma was adjusting. Alexander agreed to everything. He was ready to open his life completely if it meant giving her a permanent home. A little while later, Emma came down slowly holding her teddy. She looked shy but a bit more comfortable than yesterday. Alexander smiled warmly. "Good morning, Emma." She gave a small smile back. "Good morning." They ate breakfast together, and this time she ate a little more freely. She even asked for more bread, which surprised Alexander but also made him quietly happy. He could see tiny steps of trust forming between them. After breakfast, he asked, "Emma, would you like to see the garden?" She hesitated, then nodded. They walked outside together. The garden was simple but open, with green grass and a few flowers. Emma walked slowly across the lawn, her teddy still in her hands. She bent down to touch the flowers, her face softening as she saw a butterfly land nearby. Alexander watched from a short distance. She looked freer here, not confined by walls. He realized that giving her space to breathe was just as important as keeping her close. She turned back toward him and asked, "Can I play here every day?" "Of course." Alexander replied. This is your garden now. She gave another small smile. It's pretty. For Alexander. That simple smile was worth everything. Later that day a social worker arrived for a surprise visit. Alexander welcomed her inside. Emma grew nervous. Hiding slightly behind his arm, clutching her teddy. The woman introduced herself and explained she was there to see how Emma was adjusting. Emma, she said kindly, how do you feel here? Emma looked at Alexander first, then back at the woman. Her voice was quiet but clear. It's nice here. The social worker asked, do you feel safe? Emma paused, then nodded. Yes, he takes care of me. The woman smiled and made notes. Alexander stayed silent, letting Emma speak for herself. He knew her words carried more weight than anything he could say. After the visit, Emma seemed relieved when the woman left. Alexander knelt beside her. You did very well, he said. She whispered, I didn't want them to take me away again. He looked into her eyes seriously. They won't. Not while I'm here. Her small shoulders relaxed slightly, and she leaned against him. That evening, Alexander set aside his work and sat with her in the living room. She was drawing again. This time she drew a picture of herself, her teddy, and a tall figure beside her labeled Dad. She showed it to him shyly. Is this me? He asked. She nodded. Yes. It's you. He felt a lump in his throat. He placed the drawing carefully on the table as if it were the most valuable document he had ever received. I'll keep this safe forever, he promised. Before bedtime Emma asked, can you read me another story? Alexander agreed and sat beside her. As he read, she leaned closer, resting her head lightly against his arm. For her, it was comfort. For him, it was a responsibility greater than any he had ever known. When she finally drifted off to sleep, he closed the book and whispered, Good night, my daughter. That night, alone in his study, Alexander thought deeply. He had money, power, and everything material. But none of it had ever filled the emptiness he carried. Now for the first time, he felt whole. And it was because of a little girl who had called him Dad. The days ahead would bring court hearings, procedures and scrutiny. But Alexander knew he was ready. He had faced many battles in his life. But this was the most important one, proving to the world. And to Emma. That he was not just pretending to be her father. He was becoming one. That night, Alexander sat by Emma's bed, watching her chest rise and fall with steady breaths. She had fallen asleep clutching her teddy. Her lips slightly curved in a tired smile. He had seen so much strength in her that day, more strength than many adults carried. It humbled him. It also made him determined. He could not allow the system to tear her away now. When morning came, Alexander was already awake. He had spoken with his lawyer late into the night, and knew that the court hearing was approaching fast. Everything depended on how both he and Emma were seen in the eyes of the law. Papers and money could only go so far. What mattered most was proof of a genuine bond. That truth gave him both courage and fear, because though he loved Emma already, he had to make sure Emma felt the same. At breakfast, Emma surprised him by taking her own seat without waiting for him to invite her. She placed her teddy carefully on the table beside her plate and whispered, Good morning. Alexander's heart lifted, he smiled warmly. Good morning, Emma. Did you sleep well? She nodded shyly, then took a sip of her milk. For the first time, she did not look like a guest. She looked like she belonged. After the meal, Alexander suggested something different. How would you like to go shopping today? You can pick anything you need. Clothes, books, toys. Emma hesitated, her eyes searching his face. Anything, he assured. The day turned into a quiet adventure. They went to a store, and instead of rushing, Alexander let Emma wander freely. She touched dresses, opened storybooks, and held pencils as if each item carried weight. At one point she picked up a pair of small shoes and whispered, These won't hurt when I run. Alexander swallowed hard. She was used to discomfort, used to wearing what didn't fit. Watching her now, he realized he wasn't just giving her things. He was giving her freedom. When the cashier bagged the items, Emma clutched the bag tightly. All this for me? She asked. Yes, Alexander said, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. For you. Because you deserve it. On the drive home, Emma grew quiet. She stared out the window, then finally spoke. Do people take things away when they change their minds? The question pierced him. Who told you that? She shrugged. At the shelter, sometimes toys were given, then taken away. Some kids had to share. And then nothing felt like it was yours anymore. Alexander gripped the wheel tightly. Emma, listen to me. Nothing I give you will ever be taken back. What's yours stays yours. And that includes this home. Her eyes filled with cautious hope. She didn't answer, but she hugged her Teddy tighter. The days leading up to the court hearing passed with small, tender moments. Emma began speaking more freely. She asked Alexander about his childhood. About what he liked to eat, even about his favorite colors. Every answer seemed to comfort her. As if learning about him helped her decide whether she could truly trust him. One evening, she asked a question that caught him off guard. Do you ever feel lonely? He paused, then answered honestly, yes, for a long time. Before you came here, the house was very quiet. Too quiet. She looked at him thoughtfully. Me too. I felt lonely all the time. But not so much now. Alexander felt something inside him soften. She was letting him in piece by piece. Finally, the morning of the court hearing arrived. Emma wore one of her new dresses. And Alexander held her hand firmly as they walked into the courthouse. The building was large and intimidating, but he bent down and whispered. Don't be afraid. I'm right here with you. She nodded, her small fingers gripping his tightly. Inside, the judge asked questions, reviewed papers, and listened to the caseworker's report. At one point, the judge turned to Emma. Young lady, how do you feel staying with Mr. Alexander? Emma froze. Glancing up at Alexander, his calm smile encouraged her. She took a deep breath and spoke softly. He makes me feel safe. He doesn't take things away. He lets me laugh. I want to stay. The courtroom grew silent. The judge studied her for a moment, then looked at Alexander. Children rarely speak with such honesty. It is clear she trusts you. Alexander felt his throat tighten. He managed a respectful nod. But inside he wanted to weep with relief. The proceedings continued, and finally, the judge gave the decision Alexander would be granted full custody, with the responsibility of providing Emma with a stable and loving home. Emma gasped softly, her eyes widening. Does that mean I don't have to leave? She whispered. Alexander knelt beside her, his voice trembling. It means you are mine, and I am yours. Always. For the first time, Emma dropped her teddy and wrapped both arms around his neck. It was the hug he had been waiting for. The moment that sealed everything more powerfully than any paper could. When they walked out of the courthouse, the world seemed brighter. Emma skipped beside him, holding his hand, no longer with fear but with joy. She whispered, I finally have a dad. Alexander looked at her and smiled. And I finally have a daughter. That night, back at the house, Alexander prepared a small celebration. He ordered her favorite meal, set the table with balloons, and placed a cake in the center that read Welcome Home, Emma. Emma's eyes sparkled when she saw it. She laughed, clapped her hands, and for the first time, her laughter filled every corner of the house like sunlight. As they sat together, Alexander realized that life had given him more than he had ever asked for. His empire of buildings and companies felt small compared to the single heart sitting across from him, smiling through tears of happiness. For Emma, the pain of being unwanted had been replaced by the security of being chosen. And for Alexander, the emptiness of his wealth had been replaced by the fullness of fatherhood. The man who had once walked alone, now had a child who called him dad. And the little girl who had once been afraid of losing everything now knew she had gained the one thing no one could take away. A family. The days after the court hearing felt different, almost like a new season had begun. Alexander woke every morning with purpose. No longer surrounded by silence, but by the sound of Emma's small footsteps on the stairs. The sound of her voice calling his name. For the first time in years, his mansion felt like a home. One morning, Emma ran into his study holding a drawing. Look, she said proudly, placing the paper on his desk. It was a crayon picture of a tall man holding hands with a little girl. That's you and me, she explained. Alexander studied the uneven lines, the bright colors, and the heart drawn above their heads. He felt something stir in his chest. It's beautiful, he said softly. Can I keep it here on my desk? Emma nodded eagerly. So you won't forget me when you work. He knelt and held her shoulders gently. Emma. I could never forget you. You are the reason I want to work harder. Everything I do now I do for us." Her smile widened, and she hugged him tightly. Life began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings were filled with school preparations. Alexander hired a tutor at first to help Emma adjust. But soon she joined a nearby school where she could meet children her age. The first day was hard. She clung to him at the gate, whispering, "What if no one likes me?" Alexander bent down, looking into her worried eyes. "They will like you because you are kind and strong. And even if the whole world forgets, I will always be here waiting when you come back." She let go slowly, and when she walked inside, she kept turning back to make sure he was still there. He stayed until she disappeared into the classroom. That evening, when she returned, she ran into his arms, her laughter bubbling out. "I made a friend," she announced. Alexander lifted her off the ground, spinning her gently. "I knew you would." As days turned to weeks, Emma began to blossom. She laughed more often, asked questions about everything, and even challenged Alexander to silly games. She would run through the halls, daring him to catch her, and he, a man once consumed by boardrooms and contracts, found himself running and laughing like a boy. But new challenges also appeared. One evening, Emma came home upset. She threw her school bag on the floor and sat in a corner, hugging her teddy bear. "What happened?" Alexander asked gently, kneeling beside her. She wiped her eyes. "Some kids said I don't have a real family because I don't have a mom." The words cut through Alexander. He pulled her close and stroked her hair. "Emma, listen to me. Families are not about what people say. Families are about love. You have me, and I have you. That makes us real. Don't let anyone make you believe otherwise." She sniffled. "But it still hurts." "I know," Alexander admitted, his voice heavy. "It hurts me too. But what we have is stronger than their words. Every day we spend together proves it." Emma leaned into him, her small body trembling. "Promise you won't leave me." He kissed the top of her head. "I promise. Forever." That night, after she fell asleep, Alexander sat in the living room, staring into the fire. He realized that while money and power had always defined him, now it was Emma who gave meaning to his life. He was no longer living for deals or skyscrapers. He was living for her. The following weekend, Alexander decided to show Emma a part of his world. He took her to one of his company buildings, introducing her to his staff. At first, she stayed behind him, shy, but when he encouraged her, she stepped forward, greeting people with a timid smile. "This is my daughter," Alexander announced proudly. The word daughter rolled off his tongue naturally, filling him with joy. Emma's eyes lit up when she heard him call her that in front of others. She whispered later, "You really called me your daughter?" "Because that's who you are," he replied. Slowly, Emma began to believe it herself. She started calling him, Dad. Without hesitation, her voice filled with certainty. Each time she said it, Alexander's heart swelled. One evening, as they sat together reading, Emma asked a question that startled him. "Do you ever think about having someone else here? Like a mom for me?" Alexander paused, closing the book softly. He looked at her thoughtful face and realized she wasn't asking out of complaint, but curiosity. "I've thought about it," he admitted honestly. "But the truth is, I don't want you to feel like you're not enough. You are my whole world already. If someone comes into our lives one day, it would only be because it makes both of us happier. Not because we need it to feel complete." Emma nodded slowly, satisfied with his answer. She leaned against his arm. "I like it being just us. It feels safe." He kissed her forehead. "Then just us it will be. Over time." Emma's laughter became the music of the house. She filled every room with warmth, turning empty spaces into places of comfort. Alexander often stood at the doorway of her room, watching her draw, read, or talk to her teddy. He knew then that adopting her had not been charity or duty, it had been destiny. One night, during a quiet dinner, Emma placed her fork down and looked at him seriously. "You know, Dad, you saved me." Alexander blinked. "Saved you?" She nodded. "If you hadn't come, I would still be alone. I think I was waiting for you all along." His chest tightened. "Emma, I didn't just save you. You saved me too. I was alive. But I wasn't living. Now, because of you, I know what love really means." But tears shimmered in her eyes, But this time they were happy tears. She reached across the table, and held his hand. That moment sealed what both of them already knew. They were no longer two broken souls searching for meaning. They were father and daughter, bound not by blood, but by choice, trust, and unconditional love. And as Alexander looked at her, he realized his story had changed forever. The man who once believed he had everything discovered that true wealth was not measured in power or money. True wealth was the little girl sitting across from him, smiling with the certainty of belonging. 2. The seasons shifted, and time moved gently forward. Emma's world was no longer shadowed by fear or loneliness. She had grown brighter, stronger, and more alive, and Alexander watched her with pride each day. One morning, he stood by the window as Emma played in the garden. She was chasing butterflies, laughing so hard that the sound carried through the open glass. For Alexander, it was proof of everything he had fought for. The court battles, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt. All of it had led to this. A child who could laugh without fear. When Emma noticed him watching, she ran toward the house, her hair flying behind her. She burst through the door, cheeks red, and announced, "Dad, I caught one." I held it for a moment, then let it go because it looked happier in the air. Alexander smiled, kneeling to meet her eyes. "That's because you understand something very important. Real love doesn't cage, it frees. Just like you, Emma. You were meant to fly free, and I will never hold you back." Her smile softened, and she hugged him tightly. That evening, Alexander decided to tell her something he had been holding in his heart. As they sat together, he said, "Emma, do you know why I never walk away from you?" She tilted her head curiously. "Because I'm your daughter." "Yes," he said, stroking her hair. "But also because you gave me a reason to be more than I was. Before you I had money, power, success, but I was empty. When you came into my life, you filled that emptiness. You taught me what it means to love without conditions. You gave me back my heart." Emma's eyes glistened. "And you gave me back my smile." The room grew quiet, filled with the weight of truth. They didn't need more words. The bond between them spoke louder than any promise. Weeks later, Emma stood on stage at her school play. She wore a simple costume and spoke her lines clearly. But what struck Alexander most was not her performance. It was the way she looked for him in the crowd. When their eyes met, she smiled with absolute certainty. As if the world could crumble and still she would not be afraid, because he was there. After the play, she rushed into his arms. "Did you see me?" "Dad, I saw you," he said proudly. "And I have never been more proud in my life." And Emma's laughter rang out, and in that moment Alexander knew the truth. He had built towers that touched the sky, but none of them reached as high as the little girl in his arms. As time passed, people around them noticed the change in Alexander. Colleagues, friends, even strangers commented on how different he seemed. Kinder, calmer, more human. But he always answered with the same words. "It wasn't me who changed. It was my daughter who saved me." One night, as Emma prepared for bed, she asked softly, "Do you think my real parents would be proud of me?" Alexander sat on the edge of her bed and took her hand. "Emma, listen carefully. You are not defined by those who left. You are defined by the love you give and the love you receive. And I can promise you this, if they could see you now, they would see a brave, bright, extraordinary girl. And I know in my heart, they would be proud. But you don't need their pride anymore. You have mine. Forever." Emma's eyes shone with tears, but she smiled. "That's all I ever wanted." She fell asleep soon after, her teddy tucked safely under her arm. Alexander watched her for a long time, realizing that the story of his life had been rewritten. He was no longer just a rich man with an empire. He was a father. And that role, more than any title, would be his greatest legacy. Years later, when Emma looked back at her childhood, she would remember one truth above all. She was chosen, she was loved, and she was never alone again. And for Alexander, the man who thought he had everything, the miracle had been simple yet profound. The miracle was a little girl who had walked into his life, and taught him the true meaning of family. In the end, it wasn't wealth that defined him. It wasn't buildings, contracts, or success. It was the sound of his daughter's laughter echoing through the halls of their home. That was his real fortune. And as he tucked Emma in that final night, whispering, I love you. He knew the story had reached its perfect ending, not of a CEO and a child, but of a father and daughter who had saved each other. This story is a reminder that true wealth lies not in riches or success, but in love, kindness, and the bonds we create. Family is not always built by blood, it is built by choice, trust, and sacrifice. And sometimes, the smallest heart can bring the greatest change. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the channel. Thank you for giving your precious time.